It was just another busy afternoon at the Green Bean Cafe, a small but trendy spot nestled in the heart of downtown. The coffee machines hummed softly, the chatter of regulars filled the air, and Michelle, the waitress, darted from table to table with practiced ease. She was used to the rush, used to the noise, and used to the endless stream of customers that passed through. But today was different. As she wiped down the counter, a figure she didn't recognize walked in. He was tall, with messy hair and a calm but intense presence. His sunglasses were perched low on his nose, and despite the fact that it was a sunny day, he wore a black hoodie. He looked around, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Michelle. Her heart skipped a beat. There was something about him, an air of quiet authority that made everyone around him take a step back. He didn't look like someone who'd typically come into this cafe. He looked like someone who could change the world with a single decision. Then it clicked. Elon Musk. Michelle's pulse quickened. She'd read about him in the news, heard him speak on podcasts, but never imagined she'd be face to face with him. Still, she did her best to stay composed. It wasn't every day that a world-renowned billionaire walked into a cafe, but her job was to serve, not to stare. "Hey, welcome to the Green Bean," she said, forcing a smile. "What can I get for you?" Elon looked up, and for a moment, she felt like he was scanning her as well. His gaze was calculating, sharp, and then it softened. "I'll have a black coffee, please. Simple. No frills." Michelle nodded, still in disbelief. She turned to make the coffee, her hands a little shaky. The room seemed to hold its breath as she worked. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, and even the regulars seemed to notice that the atmosphere had changed. A few whispers floated around the room. "Is that really him?" someone asked. "Yeah, that's gotta be Elon Musk," another voice replied, a mix of awe and excitement in their tone. As Michelle placed the coffee on a tray and turned to approach his table, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass. She adjusted her apron, trying to act natural, though her mind was racing. What was he doing here? Was he just another customer, or was this some kind of sign? When she set the coffee down in front of him, their eyes met again, and this time, he smiled. It was brief, but there was something warm in it, genuine, even. "Thank you," he said softly. Michelle nodded, trying not to let her nerves show, but she couldn't help but feel like she had just crossed paths with someone destined to leave an impact on her life, even if she didn't know how. And then, just as quickly as he'd appeared, Elon Musk got up to leave. His presence had hardly registered for most of the cafe's patrons, but it was clear to Michelle that something had just shifted. She watched as he disappeared out the door, and in that moment, she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. She turned back to the counter, and her heart sank. Her manager, Tom, was walking towards her, his face hard with a kind of authority that made her stomach twist. He motioned for her to step aside. "Michelle, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his voice low. "In my office." Confused and unsettled, she followed him into the back room. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tom didn't answer right away. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his expression tense. "I need you to explain what happened out there with Elon Musk." Michelle blinked. "What do you mean? I just served him his coffee." "I know what you did," Tom interrupted, his tone sharp. "You've gone and made a scene. The whole cafe's talking about you. That kind of thing could mess with our reputation. You need to be more careful about who you interact with." Michelle felt her pulse race. "I didn't do anything wrong. He was just a customer." Tom cut her off again. "I don't care if he's a customer or not. We have a business to run here. And you just took a huge risk by making a spectacle of it." Her stomach twisted. She didn't understand. She had simply treated Elon with the same respect she gave any other customer, but the look on Tom's face told her that something bigger was at play. "You're fired," Tom said bluntly, his voice cold. Michelle's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, everything around her seemed to blur. She had just been fired for doing something good, helping someone, a famous someone, sure, but that didn't change the fact that she had done nothing wrong. "Wait, what?" Michelle stammered. "You can't be serious." "I am. I don't care if it was Elon Musk himself. You crossed a line today, And it's not the first time I've had to talk to you about your behavior." Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe it. Not only had she helped a billionaire, but she just lost her job over it. How was she going to tell Jamal? How was she going to make it through this? The door to the office swung open, and Michelle stepped out into the bustling cafe, her thoughts a blur. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. Her life had just taken a turn she couldn't have predicted. What would you do if you were in Michelle's shoes? Would you risk everything to help someone in need? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Michelle's life had never been easy, but she had always managed to get by. Born and raised in a small, run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, she learned early on that life wasn't going to hand her anything. Her mother, a kind but weary woman who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, had taught her the value of hard work. "Nothing worth having comes easy," she used to say. Michelle took those words to heart, carrying them with her as she navigated the twists and turns of her own life. Now, at 32 years old, Michelle had a son named Jamal, and he was her world. Jamal was 8, smart and full of energy, with a bright future ahead of him. Michelle had promised herself that she would do whatever it took to give him a better life than the one she had. She had seen the way people in her neighborhood struggled, the way they got stuck in a cycle of poverty and despair. She wasn't going to let that happen to Jamal. Her job at the Green Bean Cafe had been a step up for Michelle. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed her to keep a roof over their heads. She had been working there for almost 2 years, and while the long hours often wore her out, she appreciated the stability. The cafe's owner, Tom, was a stickler for rules, but Michelle knew he meant well. Still, her relationship with him was complicated. He was a businessman first and foremost, and while he never made her feel unwelcome, he also never went out of his way to help her or her situation. Michelle's relationship with her co-workers was a mix of friendly and strained. There was Sarah, who had become a close friend over the past year. Sarah had been the one to show Michelle the ropes when she first started and had always had her back. But then there was Kim, the shift manager, who made no secret of her distaste for Michelle. Kim was a tough, no-nonsense kind of person, and she didn't take kindly to Michelle's quiet determination. It was no secret that Michelle was aiming for more than a life behind the counter, and Kim resented her for it. They had clashed more than once over minor things, but Michelle always tried to rise above it. And then there was Jamal. He was her reason for everything. Every decision she made, every choice, was to create a better future for him. Michelle didn't want him to grow up the way she did, always worrying about where the next meal was coming from or whether the electricity bill would get paid. She wanted him to dream big, to be anything he wanted to be without fear of failure. On days when Michelle had a hard shift at the Green Bean, she would come home to find Jamal's face lighting up when she walked through the door. He would run up to her, his little arms wrapping around her legs. "Mommy, you're home," he'd say, and all the exhaustion would melt away. It was moments like these that kept her going, kept her fighting through the tough days. But now, as she stood in the dimly lit back office of the cafe, trying to process what had just happened, Michelle was struggling to find her center. Losing her job wasn't just a blow to her pride. It was a potential disaster. Without that steady income, how could she take care of Jamal? How could she keep up with rent, bills, and all the little things that added up to the cost of living? She had been through tough times before, of course. After Jamal was born, her relationship with his father, Marcus, fell apart. Marcus had promised to stick around, but when things got hard, he left, leaving Michelle to raise Jamal on her own. She had been angry at first, bitter even, but over time, she had learned to let go of that anger. There was no use in dwelling on the past. She had to focus on the present, on the here and now. But now, with her job gone, Michelle felt that same knot of uncertainty creeping back into her chest. What would she do next? How would she explain this to Jamal? He was too young to understand that sometimes life could be unfair, that people made decisions that didn't always make sense. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Michelle glanced down to see a text from Sarah. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Michelle took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She quickly typed back, "I'm not sure. I don't know what to do right now." The reply came quickly. "Listen, if you need anything at all, just let me know. You've got this. Michelle stared at the screen for a moment, the kindness of Sarah's words bringing a lump to her throat. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. Maybe this was just a bump in the road. Maybe there was a way out. She had to believe that. For Jamal. As she slid her phone back into her pocket, she heard Tom's footsteps approaching. She had to face him again, to figure out what her next move was going to be. Michelle, Tom's voice was sharp as he appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but this is how it has to be. You should have known better than to get mixed up in all that. Michelle clenched her fists, fighting the urge to say something she would regret. Instead, she took a deep breath and forced a smile. I understand. I'll get my things. As she walked toward the staff room to gather her belongings, her mind raced. She had to move fast. There was no time to wallow in self-pity. She needed a plan. She needed to find a way to turn this around, for Jamal's sake. And maybe, just maybe, helping Elon Musk would be the unexpected break she needed. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for the consequences of that yet. The door to the Green Bean Cafe slammed behind Michelle, and the cold, late afternoon air hit her face like a slap. Her head spun with a mix of disbelief and frustration. She had just been fired for helping someone. No matter how many times she replayed it in her mind, the logic still didn't make sense. She had simply done her job. She had served a customer, one of the most famous men in the world, and now she was paying for it. The injustice of it stung more than she wanted to admit. Michelle shoved her hands deep into the pockets of her coat and began the walk home. The streets, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien, like they were closing in on her. Every step seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of her new reality was sinking in, layer by layer. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a text from Jamal's school. Jamal is waiting to be picked up. Please let us know if there's a delay. Her heart sank. Jamal. He had no idea what had just happened. She had promised him a better life, and now she couldn't even keep the promise of a simple afternoon pickup. Michelle quickened her pace, fighting back the tears threatening to fall. She couldn't afford to break down now. Not in front of Jamal. Not when he was depending on her. She arrived at the school just in time to see Jamal standing by the gates, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking up and down the street for her. When their eyes met, his face lit up with a smile that made Michelle's heart ache. "Mommy!" Jamal yelled, his voice full of excitement as he ran towards her. Michelle crouched down to his level, holding out her arms to embrace him. He wrapped his little arms around her neck, his tiny hands patting her back. "I missed you, Mommy," he said, his voice innocent and full of joy. "Did you get me a snack today?" Michelle blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. She shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Not today. Let's just get home and figure things out, okay?" "Okay," Jamal chirped, pulling back just enough to look at her. "Can we play when we get home?" Michelle nodded, her throat tight. "Of course, baby. We'll play." The walk back home was quiet. Jamal chatted happily about his day at school, telling Michelle about the games he played with his friends, but she could barely focus on his words. Her mind was still racing, thinking of ways to fix this. How could she find a new job? How could she explain to Jamal that things were going to be harder now? When they finally reached their apartment, Michelle opened the door to their small, modest space. The familiar scent of home filled her senses, but it didn't bring her the comfort it usually did. Everything felt different now. Jamal ran to the living room and plopped down in front of the TV, his backpack forgotten at the door. Michelle set her purse down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, just staring. It felt like everything was slipping through her fingers, and she had no idea how to stop it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sarah. "I'm sorry about what happened. I can't believe Tom did that. Do you need anything?" Michelle stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could Sarah really do? She had been there for her in the past, but this was bigger than anything they had ever faced. There was no quick fix for this. But then something caught her eye, an article shared by Sarah in the text. The headline read, "Elon Musk's secret visit to local cafe causes stir." Here's what happened next. Michelle's breath caught in her throat. It was the very same cafe, the very same day. And she was in the article. Her face wasn't visible, but the text mentioned a waitress who served Musk a coffee, despite the growing frenzy around him. The article went on to talk about how the cafe was becoming the next hotspot for Musk sightings. And then, there was a part that made her stomach churn. Sources close to Musk confirmed that he was impressed with the service and the waitress's calm demeanor under pressure. But insiders suggest her connection to Musk could lead to more than just a friendly exchange. Michelle's mind raced. Her heart pounded in her chest. More than just a friendly exchange? What did that mean? Was this a setup? Or was she caught up in something she had no control over? Why hadn't she thought of this sooner? She couldn't sit idly by. Her job was gone, yes, but if this article was true, if there was even the slightest chance that her interaction with Elon Musk could lead to something bigger, she had to act. She grabbed her phone and quickly typed a message to Sarah. "Did you see the article? It mentions me. Do you think I should reach out to them?" The reply came almost instantly. "Definitely. This could be your big break. But be careful. You don't know what they'll expect from you." Michelle hesitated. She didn't know what to expect either. But she knew one thing. She couldn't let this opportunity slip by. This could be her way out. She could use this moment, this bizarre twist of fate, to change the course of her life. But how? How could she even begin to reach out to someone like Elon Musk? Was she even prepared for whatever came next? As she stood there, staring at her phone, Jamal's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mommy, can we play now?" Michelle looked down at her son. He was still smiling, unaware of the storm brewing in her mind. She smiled back, pushing her worries aside. For now, she had to hold it together for him. She had to take this one step at a time. But deep down, Michelle knew that whatever came next would change everything. The question was she ready for it? The next few days passed in a blur for Michelle. She woke up each morning with the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. Every time she looked at Jamal, smiling up at her with that innocent face, the responsibility felt even heavier. He deserved more, and she would do whatever it took to give him that. But how? That question gnawed at her constantly. How could she possibly change her life now, after everything that had happened? The article about Elon Musk and the cafe had gone viral. News outlets picked up on it, and the story spread like wildfire. The attention was overwhelming. But Michelle stayed under the radar. She didn't want to draw too much attention to herself. She just wanted to move forward and figure out what came next. Then came the call. It was early in the morning, and Michelle had just finished making breakfast for Jamal when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be a potential employer? Or was it someone else reaching out about the Musk situation? She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello? Michelle?" The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and professional. "This is Rachel Harris from Tesla. I'm reaching out regarding your interaction with Mr. Musk at the Green Bean Cafe. Is this a good time to talk?" Michelle froze. Rachel Harris from Tesla? Was this really happening? Yes, I can talk," she replied, trying to sound composed, though her voice wavered with nervous energy. "I'll get straight to the point," Rachel continued. "Mr. Musk was very impressed with your professionalism during his visit. We'd like to invite you for a meeting to discuss a potential opportunity with Tesla. Are you available this week?" Michelle's breath caught in her throat. An opportunity with Tesla? She had never imagined this in a million years. I don't know what to say," Michelle stammered, her heart racing. "I don't have any experience in anything related to Tesla." Rachel's voice was warm and understanding. "That's not a concern for us. Mr. Musk values drive and integrity, and from what we've gathered, you've shown both in abundance. This isn't about experience. It's about potential. We'd like to meet with you in person and discuss what we have in mind." Michelle felt dizzy. Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. This was a chance, an incredible chance. But was she ready? What if she wasn't good enough? What if she messed it all up? "Of course," Michelle finally said, her voice shaky but determined. "When can I come in?" Rachel set up the meeting for the following Thursday afternoon, and Michelle hung up the phone with trembling hands. It felt like her whole world had just shifted in a matter of seconds. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Michelle made sure Jamal was taken care of, dropping him off at school and picking him up as usual. But inside, she was restless, anxious. Every moment felt like she was on the edge of something huge, but she didn't know how to navigate it. The uncertainty was suffocating. On the morning of the meeting, Michelle could barely stomach her coffee. She had spent hours picking out the right outfit, trying to project professionalism while still being herself. She couldn't afford to mess this up, but the pressure of it all was starting to get to her. She dropped Jamal off at school and made her way to Tesla's headquarters. It was a sleek, modern building that exuded a level of sophistication she was not used to. As she walked through the doors, she felt like an imposter, out of place in a world so far removed from her own. Rachel met her in the lobby with a warm smile, leading her to a sleek conference room. As they sat down, the conversation started off casual, nothing too intense. Rachel asked Michelle about her background, her thoughts on technology, and her goals. Michelle did her best to answer, but inside, she felt out of her depth. How could she possibly belong here? This was Tesla, a company that was changing the world. And then there was her, just a waitress from a cafe who had happened to cross paths with one of the most powerful men in the world. But as the conversation progressed, Rachel began to explain the reason for the meeting. "We're working on a project that involves both social impact and innovation," Rachel said, her eyes brightening with enthusiasm. "And we think you might be the perfect person to help us bridge the gap between technology and everyday people. We've been looking for someone who understands the struggles of real people, someone who can connect on a personal level. And you, Michelle, have demonstrated that kind of empathy and resilience." Michelle's head was spinning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was she really being offered a chance to work on something that could change lives? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, her mind raced as the reality of the situation started to settle in. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. But was she ready for it? Could she truly make a difference in this world of high-powered technology and billion-dollar companies? Rachel leaned forward, sensing Michelle's hesitation. "I know this is a big leap, Michelle. It's not easy, but we believe in you. All we need from you is the willingness to learn, to grow, and to step outside of your comfort zone. If you're open to it, we'd love to have you on board." Michelle's heart pounded in her chest. This was the chance of a lifetime. She had been given an opportunity that most people could only dream of, but with it came the pressure of succeeding, of proving that she belonged. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let fear control her anymore. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'll do whatever it takes." Rachel smiled, extending her hand across the table. "Welcome to the team, Michelle." As Michelle shook her hand, a surge of excitement mixed with a lingering sense of fear. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not just for herself, but for Jamal. If you were Michelle, would you have taken the leap, or would you have hesitated? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The following weeks felt like a blur. Michelle's life had changed in ways she never thought possible, and the enormity of it all began to hit her. The job at Tesla wasn't just a career opportunity. It was a complete shift in her reality. Her days were filled with intense meetings, brainstorming sessions, and learning curves that seemed insurmountable. But with each challenge, she felt more determined to prove herself. She wasn't just doing this for the job. She was doing it for Jamal. She had to make it work, no matter what. The transition wasn't easy. Michelle struggled with imposter syndrome, the nagging feeling that she didn't belong in this high-stakes world of billion-dollar decisions. But every time she doubted herself, she remembered why she was here, to make a better life for Jamal. And that was the fuel that kept her going. Then came the call that would change everything. It was one of those late evenings when Michelle was sitting at her small kitchen table, sorting through paperwork and trying to catch up on emails. Jamal was already asleep, his quiet breaths coming from the next room. The apartment was still, and for the first time in weeks, Michelle allowed herself to breathe, if only for a moment. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. "Hello?" she answered, expecting another work-related call. "Michelle." Rachel's voice was urgent on the other end. "I need to talk to you. It's about the project you're working on." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? Is everything okay? We've hit a bit of a setback, Rachel said, her tone tight. There's a big investor meeting coming up, and things are looking shaky. Elon has some concerns about our approach, and he's asked for a complete overhaul of our proposal. Michelle's mind raced. What does this have to do with me? Rachel hesitated. We need you to step up, Michelle. You've been so good at understanding the people we're trying to reach. We need your perspective now more than ever. Elon's team wants a solution that connects with real people, the ones who don't have the luxury of technology but need it the most. They want something that feels personal, something authentic. We think you're the key to making that happen. Michelle was taken aback. But I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about technology or investors. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. Rachel's voice softened. Michelle, we've seen what you're capable of. This is your chance to show everyone what you can really do. We need someone who understands the human side of things, someone who has lived through the struggles. That's you. Michelle stared at the wall in front of her, processing what Rachel had said. This was it, the moment that would make or break everything. The weight of it felt suffocating. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't prepared to stand in front of a room full of powerful investors and sell an idea that could change the course of Tesla's future. But deep down, she knew she couldn't back out now. She had come this far. I'll do it, she said, the words coming out more confidently than she felt. I'll step up. Rachel's relief was palpable. Great. We'll give you all the details tomorrow. Just remember, this is big, Michelle. You're not just representing yourself. You're representing a new approach, a new way of thinking. This is your chance to make a real impact. The call ended, and Michelle sat in the silence of her apartment, her heart racing. She felt the pressure mounting. This was her moment. There was no turning back. The next day, Michelle dove into the work with everything she had. She stayed up late, researching, brainstorming, and crafting a presentation that could resonate with both the investors and the team at Tesla. She put herself in the shoes of everyday people, the ones who didn't have access to the latest gadgets, the ones who struggled just to make ends meet. She knew what it was like to live without the luxuries that others took for granted. And it was that understanding that became the core of her pitch. The day of the meeting arrived, and Michelle found herself standing outside a sleek conference room, her palms sweaty as she waited for her turn. She had spent the past few hours rehearsing her pitch, but now, as the moment approached, doubt crept in. What if they didn't like it? What if they didn't believe in her? The doors opened, and she was ushered into the room. Elon Musk was sitting at the head of the table, his gaze intense and focused. Around him were some of the top investors and executives at Tesla, all waiting for her to present. Michelle swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She took a deep breath, stepping up to the front of the room. The lights were bright, and for a moment, she couldn't see anyone clearly. But she could feel their eyes on her, waiting, expecting. She began. We're here today to talk about more than just a product, Michelle said, her voice steady, despite the fluttering in her chest. We're here to talk about people, real people, people who are often left behind in the rush to innovate. What if we could create something that didn't just cater to the wealthy or the tech-savvy, but to the everyday person who needs it the most? As she spoke, she saw the investors shift in their seats. She could tell she had their attention, but it wasn't just about talking. It was about connecting. Michelle knew that if she didn't truly make them feel what she was saying, none of it would matter. She shared stories of people like her neighbors, like Jamal. People who didn't need fancy gadgets or complicated technology. They just needed something that worked, something that made life easier. When she finished, there was a long pause. She looked at Elon, who was deep in thought. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Finally, Elon spoke. You're right, he said, his voice calm but firm. We've been thinking too much about what's next, instead of thinking about what's now. What people really need. I think this could work. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Michelle's heart raced as she took in the moment. Had she really done it? She looked at Elon, who was nodding thoughtfully. Let's move forward with this, he said. Michelle's knees almost gave out as the weight of his words settled in. This was happening. She had done it. As the meeting concluded and the investors filed out, Michelle sat down in a chair, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. She had just taken the biggest risk of her life, and it had paid off. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Michelle knew one thing for sure. She had found her voice. And now, she was ready to make a difference. The days that followed were a blur of excitement, anticipation, and a fair amount of self-doubt. Michelle couldn't shake the feeling that everything was happening too quickly, that it was all too good to be true. But she had done it. She had taken the leap, and now there was no turning back. Tesla had officially decided to move forward with her idea, and things were starting to gain momentum. She still couldn't believe it. One minute, she was waiting tables at a cafe, struggling to make ends meet, and the next, she was helping to shape the future of a billion-dollar company. It felt like something out of a movie, too unreal to be real. But as the days turned into weeks, Michelle found herself growing more and more comfortable in her new role. She had a voice now, and people listened when she spoke. Her team at Tesla respected her perspective, and Elon Musk himself was actively involved, pushing for change in ways she never expected. Yet, as much as things were changing on the outside, Michelle knew there was still a battle to fight on the inside. The pressure was mounting. She was balancing her new responsibilities with raising Jamal, and the weight of her decisions was becoming overwhelming at times. One late afternoon, after another long day of brainstorming sessions and conference calls, Michelle found herself back at her apartment, sitting on the couch, staring at the walls in exhaustion. Jamal had already gone to bed, his little figure curled up under the covers, oblivious to the whirlwind that had become his mother's life. She thought about the journey, the risks she had taken, the moments of doubt and fear, the overwhelming sense of uncertainty that had threatened to pull her under. She thought about how she had questioned herself, wondered if she was good enough, if she could really make it. But she had. She had pushed through, and now, she could see the results of her hard work. Tesla's new initiative was gaining traction. People were taking notice. The investors were impressed with her insights, and the media had started to shift the narrative. No longer was she just the woman who helped Elon Musk at a cafe. She was the woman who had a vision that could change the way people interacted with technology. Michelle leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes, taking in the quiet. There were still many hurdles to overcome, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Rachel. "Michelle, I just wanted to check in. I know things are crazy right now, but I wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've brought something fresh and powerful to the table, and I'm so excited to see where this goes." Michelle smiled to herself as she read the message. The words filled her with warmth, a reminder that, despite the struggles and uncertainties, she was making an impact. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. But it wasn't just about the job, or the money, or the recognition. It was about Jamal. She had started this journey to create a better life for him, and now, she was starting to see that vision take shape. Jamal's life was about to change. She could feel it in her bones. The future was bright, and she was going to make sure he never had to worry about where his next meal was coming from, or whether he would have the opportunities she never had. Michelle stood up from the couch and walked into Jamal's room. She watched him sleep, his face peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. Everything she had worked for was finally within reach. It hadn't been easy, but nothing worth having ever is. The next day, Michelle woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who could make a difference, a person who had faced adversity head-on and turned it into something powerful. And she wasn't stopping now. The world was full of opportunities, and Michelle was ready to seize them. She would continue to fight for Jamal's future, for her own, and for anyone else who felt like they didn't belong. She had a vision, and she was determined to make it a reality. As Michelle stepped into the day, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. She had come so far, and it wasn't just because of her own strength. She had been given opportunities that most people could only dream of, and she had taken them. But she hadn't done it alone. Along the way, she had found allies, people who believed in her, who saw her potential when she couldn't see it herself. And now, as she prepared to face the challenges ahead, she knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, she would never give up. Not on herself, and not on Jamal. The weeks following Michelle's successful pitch at Tesla were a whirlwind of new projects, late nights, and long hours. But amidst all the excitement, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was missing. She had reached a place she never dreamed possible, but the challenges were far from over. The new initiative that Michelle had championed was gaining momentum, and Tesla was beginning to shift its focus toward creating more accessible and inclusive technologies. But as things moved forward, Michelle realized that this project, like all great ventures, required more than just an idea. It required execution, and that was where the true test began. At the same time, Michelle's relationship with Jamal was evolving. As she became more entrenched in her work, Jamal started to notice the difference in her. She was around less, her mind preoccupied with spreadsheets, meetings, and deadlines. Michelle hated seeing the small frown on Jamal's face as he would ask, "Are you coming home soon, Mom?" She promised herself that no matter what happened, she would find a way to balance her newfound career with being the mother Jamal needed. He was her anchor, the reason she had fought so hard to get where she was. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it had to be done. One evening, as Michelle left a meeting at Tesla's headquarters, she received a call from Jamal. His voice sounded different, a little worried. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said, his tone unusually serious. Her heart skipped a beat. "What's wrong, baby?" "I don't know. I just feel like you're not here anymore." "Like you're always busy," Jamal confessed, his voice soft but hurt. Michelle paused for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Her mind raced. She had been so caught up in her own success that she hadn't noticed the growing distance between them. "I'm sorry, Jamal," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm doing all of this for you. I want to make our life better. I promise I'm here for you, even when I'm not around as much. You mean the world to me, and nothing will ever change that." There was a long silence before Jamal replied, his voice quieter now. "I know, Mom. I just miss you." Her heart broke at his words. She had been so focused on building a future for him that she had forgotten to be present in the now. She promised herself that she would find a way to change that, for Jamal's sake, and for her own. The next few days were a mix of highs and lows. Michelle continued to push forward with her work, but she also made a concerted effort to reconnect with Jamal. They spent more time together, playing video games, talking about school, and just enjoying each other's company. It wasn't always easy, but Michelle knew she was doing the right thing. One evening, as she was tucking Jamal into bed, he looked up at her with a small smile. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said softly. "I know you're doing something really important. Just don't forget about me." Michelle kissed him gently on the forehead. "I won't, baby. I promise." As Michelle sat in her living room later that night, the weight of everything she had been juggling hit her all at once. The pressure of her new career, the struggle to balance her personal life, and the overwhelming responsibility of raising Jamal alone. It was a lot, but she refused to give up. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. The next day, as Michelle walked into the Tesla office, she was more determined than ever. She had proven herself once. Now it was time to prove she could do it all. She could succeed in her career, provide a better future for Jamal, and still be the mom he needed. The stakes were higher than ever, and Michelle knew that she had to be ready for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Rachel. "Elon wants to meet with you next week. He's been impressed with your progress and has a new project in mind for you." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. Another project? Another test? She took a deep breath. She was ready. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. As she prepared for her meeting with Elon, Michelle reflected on how far she had come. She had started as a waitress, struggling to make ends meet, and now she was on the verge of something much bigger. But with every step forward, she knew there would be more challenges to face. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Michelle was determined to walk it, one step at a time. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Jamal. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. She was fighting for a future where people like her could make a difference, not just in the workplace, but in the world. Michelle sat nervously in the sleek, modern conference room at Tesla headquarters, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She had been here before, but this time felt different. This time, It was more than just a meeting. It was a turning point. Elon Musk walked in, his presence commanding the room as always. He greeted her with a smile, but Michelle could tell there was something more behind his eyes. This wasn't just a casual check-in. There was a new project on the horizon, and it was big, bigger than anything she had ever worked on before. Michelle, Elon began, taking a seat across from her. I've been following your progress closely, and I've been impressed with your ideas. Your initiative on inclusivity and accessible tech has already begun to make waves, and I believe we can take it even further. Michelle nodded, feeling a swell of pride. This was the moment she had been working toward, the culmination of everything she had fought for. We've got an opportunity to launch a new product line that could revolutionize how we approach sustainable tech in underdeveloped regions, Elon continued. We need someone who understands the intersection of innovation and real-world need, someone who can push boundaries and make things happen. Michelle's heart raced. This was the kind of challenge she had been waiting for. But there was one thing she wasn't prepared for. I want you to lead this project, Elon said, his gaze intense. But there's a catch. Michelle's pulse quickened. A catch? She had never heard Elon use that word in this context before. What could it possibly mean? We're going to be working in some of the most difficult markets, Elon explained. There will be logistical challenges, political roadblocks, and financial risks. This is a make-or-break opportunity. If you succeed, it will change everything. But if you fail, he let the words hang in the air. Michelle felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just another project. This was a high-stakes gamble, one that could either catapult her into the highest echelons of the tech world or see her dreams shatter. I believe in your vision, Michelle, Elon added, his voice softening. But you need to be ready. It won't be easy. Michelle sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was everything she had ever dreamed of, a chance to make a global impact. But the pressure was immense. She wasn't just leading a team. She was leading a vision that could affect millions of lives. I'm ready, she said finally, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in her stomach. I won't let you down. Elon smiled, his expression unreadable. Good. We're counting on you. As Michelle left the meeting, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had just committed to a project that could change the world, but it felt like the weight of the world was now on her shoulders. For the next few days, Michelle threw herself into the project. She reviewed proposals, worked with engineers, and met with local leaders to discuss the potential impact of the product line. But as the pressure mounted, she began to feel the familiar weight of self-doubt creeping in. She had never been more aware of how much was riding on her success. Jamal noticed the change in his mother almost immediately. She was more distracted than ever, her phone constantly buzzing with updates, her mind always somewhere else. Mom, when are you coming home tonight? Jamal asked one evening as Michelle paced around their small apartment, trying to finalize the details of a meeting for the next day. Michelle stopped and looked at him, guilt washing over her. I'm sorry, baby. I just have a lot of work right now. But I'll be home soon, I promise. But as she turned back to her phone, Jamal's words lingered in her mind. He had always been understanding of her ambition, but lately, she could see the toll it was taking on him. She was trying to build a better future for them both. But was she losing sight of what truly mattered? That night, after another late night of work, Michelle sat in the quiet of her apartment, staring at her reflection in the window. She had come so far, but she was starting to realize that the dream she was chasing might come at a cost she wasn't willing to pay. She thought about Jamal. She thought about the early days when she was just trying to make ends meet. Back then, the struggle was tangible. But now, with everything she had achieved, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing sight of the things that truly mattered. The next morning, Michelle made a decision. She would keep pushing forward with her career. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away, but she would also find a way to make time for Jamal. She wasn't just building a future for him. She was building a future for both of them, and that meant finding balance. When she walked into the Tesla office later that day, she was clear-headed and more focused than ever. She had a new perspective. She could do this, but she would do it on her terms. She wouldn't sacrifice her relationship with Jamal for the sake of her career, no matter how high the stakes were. She sat down at her desk and took a deep breath, ready to face the next challenge head-on. There was still so much work to be done, but Michelle was no longer afraid. She was determined. And with that resolve, she dove back into the project, ready to lead the charge, and this time, she would do it with her heart fully in the game. The next few weeks were a blur of activity as Michelle threw herself into the new project at Tesla. She had always been a hard worker, but this was different. This was a mission to change the world, and she couldn't afford to fail. But as the project grew in scope, so did the challenges. The first major setback came unexpectedly. The product Michelle had been working on for months, a sustainable energy device designed to help communities in underdeveloped countries, had encountered a significant technical flaw. The device, which was meant to be portable and cost-effective, kept malfunctioning in tests, failing to meet the high standards that Tesla was known for. Michelle had spent sleepless nights trying to troubleshoot the issue, working with engineers and designers to figure out what had gone wrong. But no matter what they tried, the device continued to malfunction in ways they couldn't predict. It was a crushing blow. Elon called her into his office the following day. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a sense of urgency that made Michelle's stomach churn. She had always prided herself on her ability to solve problems, but this was different. This wasn't just a minor glitch. This was a potential disaster. Michelle, Elon began, his voice steady but tinged with concern. I've been briefed on the situation. This setback is more significant than we initially anticipated. We can't afford to waste time on a failing product. If we don't solve this soon, we'll have to rethink the entire initiative. Michelle's heart sank. She had promised Elon she would make this project a success, and now it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. I understand, Michelle said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'll get to work on it right away. We'll figure this out. As she walked out of Elon's office, the weight of the world seemed to settle on her shoulders. She had put everything into this project. The thought of failing, not just for herself, but for the millions of people who would benefit from this technology, was unbearable. But Michelle wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She would not let this setback define her. She had come too far, fought too hard. She couldn't afford to let it slip away now. Over the next few days, Michelle worked around the clock, meeting with engineers, reviewing data, and testing different solutions. There were moments when she thought it was all hopeless, when the frustration felt too overwhelming to bear. But each time she hit a wall, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Jamal had been her constant source of support through all of this. Even though she hadn't been around as much, she made a point to check in with him, to remind him that no matter how busy she was, he was still her priority. Their nightly video calls became a routine that grounded her. Jamal's innocent questions and his unwavering belief in her kept her going when things seemed impossible. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Michelle collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jamal. I miss you, Mom. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The message hit her harder than she expected. She had been so caught up in her work that she had neglected the one thing that mattered most, her relationship with her son. She had promised herself she would find balance, but she was failing. That night, as Michelle sat in the quiet of her apartment, she made a vow to herself. No matter what it took, she would fix this project, but she would also fix the disconnect with Jamal. He was her anchor, her reason for everything. She couldn't let this project consume her and leave him behind. The next morning, as Michelle returned to work with a renewed sense of determination, she received a message from Elon. I've reviewed the latest updates. I think we can pivot. Let's brainstorm ideas to fix the issue. Meet me at 3 p.m. Michelle knew this was her chance. She couldn't afford to waste it. She dove back into the project, looking for new angles, new solutions. By the time the meeting with Elon rolled around, she had a new plan, one that she was confident would work. At the meeting, she presented her ideas, a modification to the device's design that would address the technical flaws while still maintaining the product's core functionality. Elon listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When she finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Elon spoke. I think this could work. Let's test it immediately and see if we can get the results we need. Michelle felt a surge of hope. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. She knew they weren't out of the woods yet, but this was a step in the right direction. As the team worked on implementing Michelle's new design, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. There was still so much work to be done, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like they might actually pull this off. That night, as she sat with Jamal and they shared a quiet dinner together, Michelle realized something important. She didn't have to do it all alone. She had her team at Tesla, and she had Jamal. They were in this together. "Mom, are you going to be home more?" Jamal asked, his voice tentative. Michelle smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "Yes, baby. I'm going to make sure of it." As she looked at her son, she knew she had made the right decision. She would fight for the success of this project, but she would never again lose sight of what truly mattered. Family, love, and balance. Those were the things that kept her grounded. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, revisions, and new prototypes. The pressure continued to mount as Michelle and her team worked tirelessly to perfect the sustainable energy device. Each failure only fueled her determination to make it right. With Elon's approval, they had begun conducting live tests with the modified design. Every result felt like a personal challenge. Michelle spent hours reviewing data, questioning assumptions, and trying to think outside the box. She had never felt more alive, her mind constantly buzzing with ideas, but it also weighed on her in ways she couldn't explain. One evening, after another round of testing had failed, Michelle took a long walk outside to clear her head. The cool night air felt refreshing as she walked through the city streets, lost in her thoughts. She had given everything to this project, but the results weren't matching up to the vision she had in her mind. Was it worth it? She wondered. What if I can't make this work? As she passed a coffee shop, a familiar face caught her eye. It was Jamal, sitting by the window, engrossed in a book. Michelle smiled, heart swelling with affection. Even in the midst of all the chaos, her son was a constant source of peace. She pushed the door open and walked inside, her heavy thoughts momentarily lifting. "Hey, baby," Michelle said, her voice soft as she slid into the seat opposite him. Jamal looked up and grinned. "Mom, you came. I knew you'd need a break." Michelle laughed, the weight of the day melting away just a little bit. "You're right. Sometimes I forget to breathe." They sat there in companionable silence, sipping their drinks. Michelle found herself recharging in the simple comfort of being with her son, something she had sorely missed lately. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was fighting a battle alone. "How's your project going?" Jamal asked after a while, looking up from his book. Michelle hesitated before responding. "It's tough, really tough, but I'm not giving up, not yet." Jamal's eyes shone with admiration. "You're not a quitter, Mom. I know you'll figure it out." Her heart swelled with pride. Jamal's confidence in her was unwavering, and that belief gave her strength. No matter how many setbacks she faced, she couldn't let him down. Not now. That night, after their time together, Michelle returned home and got back to work. She stayed up late, combing through the data once more, searching for that one breakthrough. Then, at 3 a.m., it came, an insight she had missed before. A small tweak in the energy conversion algorithm could solve the issues they'd been facing. It was simple, yet profound. Her heart raced as she made the changes, heart pounding with excitement. By the morning, the results were clear. The device was working. Not perfectly, but enough to move forward. The device's energy efficiency had improved, and the malfunctioning components had stabilized. Michelle's eyes filled with tears as she read the data over and over again. This was it. They had made it. She had made it. The next day, she called a meeting with Elon and the rest of the team to present the breakthrough. As Michelle stood in front of the conference room, she could feel the weight of the moment. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the proof that her persistence had paid off. Elon looked at her, his face unreadable, as she walked him through the new results. When she finished, there was a long silence. Her heart skipped a beat as she waited for his reaction. Finally, Elon spoke. "This is impressive, Michelle. Very impressive. You've pushed through a lot to get here. I think we can finally start ramping up production." A wave of relief flooded over Michelle. They had done it. The project was back on track, and this time, they were ready to move forward. As the team celebrated the breakthrough, Michelle felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just her victory. It was the result of teamwork, late nights, and sacrifices made by everyone involved. But it was also a reminder of why she was doing this in the first place. Later that evening, Michelle sat with Jamal again, reflecting on the day's triumphs. As she shared the good news with him, she could see the pride in his eyes. "You did it, Mom," Jamal exclaimed, his voice full of awe. "I knew you could." Michelle smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "We did it, baby. We're one step closer to making a real difference in the world." She realized in that moment that the real success wasn't just about creating a groundbreaking product or meeting the demands of a high-pressure job. It was about the journey, the lessons learned, the growth, and the relationships she had built along the way. And she was just getting started. What does it take to overcome obstacles? What fuels your determination when everything seems stacked against you? Share your thoughts below. Michelle had learned that setbacks were inevitable, but they didn't define her. It was how she rose from them that mattered. She had faced the challenge head-on, and now she was ready for whatever came next. With her son by her side and her vision clearer than ever, Michelle knew that the road ahead, while tough, would be worth every step. As the project continued to advance, Michelle felt a strange sense of unease creeping into her mind. Despite their recent success, something didn't feel quite right. The closer they got to the final stages of development, the more she felt the pressure mounting, and she began to question whether the device, even with its improvements, would truly change the world the way she had envisioned. For all the positive feedback and progress, Michelle couldn't shake the nagging doubt that had settled in her chest. The device was working, yes, but it wasn't perfect. There were still too many obstacles to overcome before it could be scaled up for mass production. And there were rumors circulating within Tesla's higher-ups about whether they should invest more in other initiatives, ones that were seemingly less risky and more profitable. Michelle had poured her heart and soul into this project. It wasn't just a job for her, it was her purpose. But as the days stretched on, she found herself waking up in the middle of the night, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers to. What if she had pushed too hard? What if this entire journey had been in vain? One particularly long afternoon, as Michelle sat alone in her office, the weight of everything began to press down on her. She stared at the latest set of reports on the device's performance, but all she saw was failure. Despite the advancements, the device was still far from the utopia she had imagined. The cost was too high, the efficiency wasn't where it needed to be, and there was still no guarantee it would be accepted by the communities who needed it most. As if on cue, Elon Musk called her into his office. "Michelle, I wanted to talk to you about the project," Elon said, his voice calm yet filled with a weight that instantly put Michelle on edge. Her stomach churned. She had been anticipating this conversation for days, ever since the rumors had started. Was this the end? Would Elon decide to pull the plug? She had worked so hard, and yet, the uncertainty hung heavy in the air. "Of course," Michelle replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Elon gestured for her to sit. "I've been reviewing the progress, and I think we're at a crossroads. You've done incredible work, no doubt, but we're facing a tough decision. The numbers are still not where we need them to be for mass production, and the investment required to get there is significant. I need to know, Michelle, do you think we're still on the right path?" Michelle's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had been dreading. "I do," she said quickly, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "I believe in this product. I believe in its potential to change lives. We just need more time. There are a few more adjustments we can make. I'm confident we can get it to the point where it will work for everyone." Elon leaned back in his chair, his gaze intense. "I'm not asking for promises, Michelle. I'm asking for certainty. Can you guarantee that this product will work in a way that will make the investment worth it?" Michelle hesitated, the doubt creeping back in. Could she truly guarantee that? She had seen the progress, but she knew better than to make unrealistic promises. The stakes were too high. Still, she wasn't ready to give up, not now. "I can't promise you certainty, Elon," Michelle said, her voice soft but firm, "but I can promise you that I will keep pushing until we get it right. I won't stop until we've given it everything we have." Elon studied her for a long moment, and Michelle held her breath, unsure of what would come next. Finally, he spoke. "All right, Michelle. I believe in you. We'll give you the time and resources you need. But this has to be the last push. There's no turning back after this." Relief washed over Michelle, but so did a renewed sense of responsibility. She had been given another chance, but this was it. There would be no more second chances. She had to make it work, for herself, for Tesla, and for everyone who would benefit from the device. After the meeting, Michelle walked back to her office, her mind racing. She had been given the green light, but that didn't mean the road ahead was clear. In fact, the pressure had just increased tenfold. Elon had given her the chance she needed, but now she had to deliver. As she sat at her desk, Michelle opened her laptop and began reviewing the project once again, combing through every detail. She couldn't afford to miss anything. And this time, she wasn't just working for the future of the project. She was working for her future, too. A message from Jamal popped up on her phone. "Hey, Mom, are you coming home soon?" Michelle's heart softened. She smiled as she typed back. "Not yet, baby. I'm working on something important, but I'll be home as soon as I can. Promise." Even in the midst of all the stress, Michelle knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let herself lose sight of what really mattered. Her son, her family, her values. These were the things that kept her grounded. No matter what happened with the project, she would never let those things slip away. As she dove back into the numbers, Michelle realized that, in many ways, this project wasn't just about creating a product. It was about proving to herself that she could face any challenge head-on, no matter how daunting. The doubts might come, but she had already shown herself that she could rise to the occasion. Now, all she had to do was keep going. The days following her meeting with Elon felt like a blur. Michelle was on a mission, no longer questioning herself but fully focused on making the final push to perfect the device. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure was relentless. Every decision felt monumental, and each late night working in the lab only reinforced the fact that time was running out. She had told Elon she could do it. Now she had to prove it. Every challenge that arose seemed more difficult than the last, but Michelle refused to let them defeat her. She wasn't just working for Tesla anymore. She was working for herself, for Jamal, for every person who could benefit from the device that had the potential to change the world. The team, now more cohesive than ever, rallied behind her. They knew the end was in sight, and with each passing day, the pressure mounted. They had been working long hours, often without sleep, but they were all driven by the same vision. They believed in Michelle, and they believed in the project. One afternoon, as Michelle sat hunched over a whiteboard, trying to map out the final adjustments needed for the device, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jamal. "Mom, you coming to my game today?" Michelle sighed and checked the time. It was already late afternoon, and she had promised Jamal she would make it to his soccer game. But the work was far from finished, and the thought of leaving the project for even a few hours felt like she was abandoning it. Still, she knew that her son needed her. "I'll make it work," she thought, sending a quick reply. "Of course, baby. I'll be there." After a few more minutes of making notes, Michelle grabbed her things and headed out the door. The drive to the game was a welcome break from the stress, and the moment she arrived at the field, she was greeted by Jamal's excited smile. His energy was infectious, and it reminded Michelle of why she was doing all of this in the first place. As Jamal's team played, Michelle found herself distracted, though in a good way. She was watching him grow into a young man, learning the value of teamwork, dedication, and perseverance. The game ended with his team winning, but Michelle's mind was already racing back to the project. That night, as she returned to her office, she dived into the work once more, feeling the weight of the final stretch bearing down on her. The test results had been positive, but there were still too many variables to account for. There was still the risk that the device would fail when it was scaled for production. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. By the following week, Michelle had made all the final adjustments. The device was now working efficiently, and the potential for scalability seemed promising. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they could do given the constraints. It was time to present the finished product to Elon. Michelle stood in front of the team, holding her breath as she prepared to present the results. This was it. This was the moment that would determine whether all their hard work was worth it. If Elon was impressed, they would move forward with the production. If not, she would have to accept the consequences. As Elon entered the room, the tension in the air was palpable. He took a seat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the team. Michelle stepped forward, her heart racing but her voice steady. "We've made it, Elon," she began. "After weeks of testing, adjusting, and refining, I believe we're ready to move forward with production. The device is now operating at a much higher efficiency, and I'm confident it can be scaled up." There was a long silence. Michelle could feel the weight of his gaze on her as he considered her words. Finally, Elon nodded. "I can see the progress. This is impressive, Michelle. You've done what many thought was impossible. I think we're ready to take the next step." The room erupted in applause, but all Michelle could feel was a wave of relief and pride. They had done it. They had made it through the darkest moments, and now they were on the verge of making something truly groundbreaking. As Michelle looked around the room at her team, she realized just how far they had come. They had faced countless obstacles, disappointments, failures, doubts, but they had never given up. And now, with Elon's approval, they were about to change the world. Later that evening, as Michelle sat alone in her office, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been long and exhausting, but she had never wavered. She had fought for this project, for her son, for a future that was bigger than herself. She thought about Jamal, how he had stood by her every step of the way. She thought about the lessons she had learned, not just about technology and innovation, but about resilience, about never letting go of a dream, no matter how difficult the road might be. Michelle smiled, knowing that while the work wasn't over, she had already won. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that she could rise above the challenges, and that was the greatest victory of all. The days after Elon's approval felt like a whirlwind. The project was officially greenlit for mass production, and Michelle was flooded with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. But the excitement quickly gave way to a new set of challenges, one she hadn't anticipated. Now that the device was ready to be produced, the real work had only just begun. There were contracts to sign, suppliers to finalize, and timelines to negotiate. The pressure was higher than ever, and Michelle was expected to lead the charge. Tesla was ready to make this product a reality, but she was now responsible for seeing it through, from start to finish. One afternoon, Michelle sat in a meeting with a group of executives, hammering out the final details of the production. She was exhausted but resolute. This was the moment she had worked toward for so long, and she wasn't about to let anything slip through her fingers now. Elon sat across from her, his sharp eyes observing every move she made. It had been a long time since their last one-on-one conversation, but she could feel his presence weighing on her. "You've got this, Michelle," Elon said after a long pause. "I know you'll see this through. But remember, the stakes are higher now. This isn't just about making a product. This is about making a difference. And we're counting on you." Michelle nodded, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always known the potential impact of the device, but hearing Elon say it out loud made the responsibility feel even more immense. There was no going back now. She had to deliver. As the meeting ended, Michelle found herself in a quiet moment of reflection. She walked down the hallway, her thoughts racing. She had pushed herself harder than ever before, and yet she couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? Could she handle the demands of leading a project of this magnitude, with everything else on her plate? But before she could dwell on those thoughts for too long, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jamal. "Mom, when are you coming home? I miss you." A pang of guilt shot through her chest. She had been so absorbed in the project that she hadn't spent nearly enough time with her son lately. She knew this was part of the price of success, sacrificing time and energy to reach her goals. But the thought of her son growing up without her presence was unbearable. Michelle quickly typed a response, "I miss you too, baby. I'll be home soon, I promise." But the promise didn't feel like enough. As she read Jamal's message, she realized that her pursuit of success had begun to come at the expense of the things that mattered most. She had spent so much time chasing her dream that she hadn't taken the time to nurture her relationship with the people who had always supported her. That night, as Michelle lay in bed, she thought about everything she had achieved, how far she had come, how much she had sacrificed. but it didn't feel as fulfilling as she had imagined. Success felt empty when it was achieved at the cost of the people she loved. She thought about Jamal's smile, his voice, his laughter, and how much she missed those moments. It was then that she realized something. No amount of professional success could fill the void created by neglecting her family. She had spent so much time climbing the ladder that she hadn't stopped to appreciate what she already had. The next morning, Michelle made a decision. She would take a step back, not from the project, but from the frenetic pace that had consumed her life. She would delegate more tasks, give her team the trust they deserved, and, most importantly, make time for Jamal. She called him before work that morning. "Hey, baby," Michelle said, her voice warm and full of love. "How about we spend some time together this weekend? Just the two of us. Maybe catch a movie or have a picnic in the park. What do you think?" Jamal's response was immediate. "That sounds awesome, Mom." Michelle felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging. There would be more meetings, more deadlines, and more pressure to deliver. But she also knew that success was no longer just about the project or the accolades. It was about finding balance, making time for the people who truly mattered, and cherishing the moments that made life meaningful. As Michelle prepared for another busy day, she knew she had taken the first step toward finding that balance. She would not allow herself to become consumed by the pursuit of success, no matter how important the project was. She had already proven to herself that she could achieve greatness. Now, it was time to focus on what truly made her life complete. How do you balance the demands of work with the needs of your loved ones? What sacrifices have you made in your own journey toward success? Share your thoughts below. Michelle had learned the hard way that success came with a price. But the most important lesson she had learned was that the people she loved were worth more than any project, any accolade, or any achievement. She had already proven that she could succeed. Now, she was ready to ensure that success didn't come at the cost of what truly mattered. Michelle thought she had everything under control. After months of grueling work, late nights, and endless challenges, she had reached a place where the project was finally on track. She was managing the team, coordinating with suppliers, and spending precious time with Jamal. She felt as though she had finally struck the delicate balance between personal and professional life. But, as with many success stories, things were never as smooth as they seemed. One morning, just a week after her conversation with Jamal, Michelle received an unexpected call. It was from Sarah, a colleague she had trusted and considered a friend. Sarah had been instrumental in helping Michelle secure some of the initial funding for the project, and over the years, they had built a professional relationship based on mutual respect. "Michelle, I need to talk to you." Sarah's voice was tense, her words clipped. Michelle's heart raced. "What's going on, Sarah? You sound worried." It's the project," Sarah began, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to be aware of something." Michelle was already on edge. "What is it? What's happening?" "Someone's been talking," Sarah said, her words almost too soft to hear. "They're trying to push you out. They want to take the device in a different direction, and they've been using your work without giving you the credit. You've been set up." The shock hit Michelle like a punch to the gut. Her mind scrambled to process what Sarah had just said. Who would do something like this? Who could betray her after everything they had been through? "Who's doing this?" Michelle demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I can't say," Sarah replied, her tone apologetic, "but I thought you should know. There's a meeting tomorrow morning where they'll discuss it." "I'm sorry, Michelle. I never thought it would come to this." The call ended, and Michelle was left staring at her phone, numb. Betrayal was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, if ever. She had built her life and her career on trust, on working together with people who shared her vision. The thought that someone could use her work for their own gain, without her knowledge or consent, was more than she could bear. But Michelle wasn't the type to back down in the face of adversity. She had fought too hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let someone take it all away. The next morning, she arrived at the meeting early, her mind racing. She had prepared herself for whatever might come, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight that awaited her. Elon was already there, along with a few other key members of the team. But what caught her off guard was the presence of a new face, Lucas, a high-level executive she didn't know well. He had recently joined the company and had been pushing for changes that Michelle didn't agree with. She had dismissed him as just another corporate suit. But now she couldn't shake the feeling that he had something to do with the plot Sarah had warned her about. As the meeting began, Michelle sat quietly, watching the faces around her. There was an undercurrent of tension in the room, and it was clear that something was about to be revealed. "Michelle," Elon began, his voice neutral, "we need to talk about the future of the project. There have been some concerns raised by a few members of the team, and I think it's important to address them." Michelle felt her stomach twist. She knew what was coming. "We've decided to make some changes," Elon continued. "There are some who believe that your approach to the device might not be the most efficient way forward. They've been pushing for a different direction." Michelle's pulse quickened, and she could feel the heat rising in her chest. She forced herself to stay calm, to hold her ground. "What do you mean, Elon? My team and I have worked tirelessly to get to this point. What changes are you talking about?" Lucas, the new executive, spoke up. "We believe that the current approach has its limitations. We think we can take the technology further, faster. And we've already started talking to new partners to help us do that." Michelle's mind was racing. "Are you telling me that my work isn't good enough? That everything we've done so far doesn't matter?" Elon looked at her, his expression hard to read. "I think the question is whether it's sustainable in the long term. We need to think bigger. There's a lot of potential here, Michelle, but we need to make sure we're taking the right steps to maximize it." The room fell silent, and Michelle felt the weight of their words bearing down on her. Her gut told her that this wasn't just about business. There was something personal at play here. She had been used, manipulated, and now she was being pushed out of her own project. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You've already made up your minds, haven't you?" she said, her voice cold. "You've already decided that I'm not the person to lead this. Well, let me make it easy for you. If you think my work isn't good enough, then maybe you should find someone else to finish it." With that, Michelle turned and walked out of the room, her mind spinning. As she left the building, she could feel the weight of the betrayal sinking in. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now it was all slipping through her fingers. But Michelle wasn't done. She wasn't going to let them take this from her. The project might be slipping out of her hands, but she had one thing left, her resolve. She would fight for what she had created, even if it meant going up against the very people she had trusted. As she drove home, Michelle made a vow to herself. She would find a way to reclaim her work, to prove that she was the one who had built it. And this time, she wouldn't let anyone take credit for her hard-earned success. The sting of betrayal lingered in Michelle's chest long after she had walked out of that meeting. Each step she took toward her car felt heavier, as though the weight of the decision she had just made was settling into her bones. How had it come to this? How had the project she had poured her heart and soul into suddenly become something she was being pushed out of? She drove home in silence, her mind reeling with thoughts of what had just transpired. She couldn't shake the image of Lucas's smug expression, the subtle way he had sided with the others to undermine her. It wasn't just business, it felt personal. This was more than a disagreement over the direction of the project. It was about power, control, and who would get the credit. But Michelle wasn't one to give up easily. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles to let someone else take her success. This wasn't just about a project anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. That evening, after a long day of work, Michelle sat down at her desk, determined to take action. She wasn't going to let the company bury her work or her contributions. She had earned this, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. She picked up the phone and called Sarah. "Hey, Michelle," Sarah answered, her voice full of concern. "How did it go? What happened?" Michelle let out a long sigh. "They're trying to take everything from me, Sarah. They want to push me out of my own project. They've already started talking to other partners, and I'm not even sure where I stand anymore." That's awful," Sarah replied, her voice filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this." "I don't know what to do," Michelle admitted. "They're making it sound like my work isn't good enough. Like I'm not good enough." "Listen to me," Sarah said firmly. "You are more than good enough. You built this from the ground up, Michelle. Don't let them rewrite history. I'm not going to, Michelle replied, her resolve growing stronger with each word. But I need help. I need to make sure that my work, our work, gets the recognition it deserves. Sarah paused for a moment, then spoke with determination. I have some connections. People who know what you've done, who can vouch for you. If you want to fight back, you'll need to get the truth out there. It's time to go public. Michelle's heart raced at the thought. Going public wasn't something she had considered before. It was risky, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like the only option. If she stayed silent, she would lose everything. But if she spoke out, if she fought for the truth, maybe there was a chance to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Let's do it, Michelle said, her voice resolute. I'll fight. I won't let them erase everything I've worked for. Sarah's tone softened. I'm with you all the way, Michelle. We'll make sure your story is heard. The next few days were a blur. Michelle met with a lawyer to discuss her options and began gathering evidence to prove her contributions to the project. She compiled emails, documents, and design prototypes, anything that could show she was the driving force behind the device. She couldn't let them take credit for her work without a fight. Meanwhile, Sarah worked behind the scenes, reaching out to journalists and industry insiders who could help amplify Michelle's story. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to ensure that her side of the story was told. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Michelle was still involved in the project, though she felt like an outsider. Every meeting, every conversation, felt like a reminder that she was no longer in control. And yet, she kept pushing forward, focusing on the ultimate goal, to set the record straight and reclaim her rightful place in the project's history. Then, the moment came. A journalist from a prominent tech publication reached out to Michelle. The article was set to be published the following week, an exposé on the situation. It would highlight the betrayal, the corporate manipulation, and Michelle's role in creating the groundbreaking technology. It would tell her side of the story in a way that no one at the company could ignore. The night before the article was set to be released, Michelle sat in her living room, staring at her phone. She had poured everything into this moment. She had taken a huge risk, and now it was time for the world to know the truth. As she hit send on the final approval for the article, Michelle couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and fear. This was it. Her fight for justice was about to reach the masses, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Michelle woke up to a flurry of notifications on her phone. The article had gone live, and the response was immediate. The media was buzzing, and people in the tech world were already discussing the story. The article went viral, and Michelle's name was front and center. She was finally getting the recognition she deserved, not just for her work, but for her courage in standing up for what was right. But even as she watched the story unfold, Michelle knew this was only the beginning. The company would likely fight back. There would be legal battles, public scrutiny, and a long road ahead. But she was ready. For the first time in a long time, Michelle felt like she was in control of her own narrative. She thought back to her son, Jamal. He had been there for her through every up and down. No matter what happened next, she knew that she had done the right thing. She had fought for herself, for her work, and for the people who believed in her. And no matter how much the world tried to tear her down, Michelle was unbreakable. The days following the article's release were a whirlwind. Michelle had braced herself for the backlash, but nothing could have prepared her for the full force of the storm that was about to hit. The company, furious at the public exposure, quickly mobilized its legal team. Lawsuits were filed, threats were made, and the media went wild. Michelle sat at her desk, her phone buzzing nonstop with calls from reporters, lawyers, and industry experts. It was overwhelming, but she couldn't afford to back down now. She had exposed the truth, and there was no turning back. Her lawyer, Greg, had been working tirelessly to prepare her case. He was sharp, pragmatic, and deeply invested in making sure Michelle didn't just survive this battle but won it. He had been by her side since the beginning, and she knew he was the one person she could count on through all of this. Greg called her one evening as she was reviewing documents for the next day's hearing. Michelle, I just got off the phone with the other side's legal team. They're pushing hard to settle, but we're not taking that deal. We need to stay firm. If we settle, they'll control the narrative, and you won't get the credit you deserve. Michelle took a deep breath. She hadn't come this far just to fold. What do we do next? They're going to try to discredit you, Greg said. Expect them to dig into your past, look for any weak spots, anything they can twist to make you look like the villain. But I'll be ready. We need to stay focused on the facts. You built this. You created it. And we have the evidence to prove it. Michelle nodded, her resolve hardening. I won't let them get away with this. The next few weeks were filled with intense legal proceedings, depositions, court filings, and constant back and forth with the company's legal team. Michelle had never been through anything like this before, but she knew it was the only way to clear her name and protect everything she had worked for. During this time, she leaned heavily on Jamal. Her son, now a teenager, had been through so much already in his young life, and yet he stood by her side, offering words of encouragement when she needed them most. One evening, as she sat on the couch, going over her notes for the next hearing, Jamal came in and sat beside her. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly, concern written all over his face. Michelle smiled, even though the exhaustion in her eyes was evident. "I'm okay, sweetie. It's just a lot to handle right now." Jamal nodded. "You've always been strong, Mom. I know you'll get through this. You always do." Her heart swelled with pride. "Thanks, baby. That means the world to me." Though the legal fight was draining, it wasn't just the stress of the court proceedings that Michelle had to face. The public perception of her was shifting, slowly, but surely. The article she had published had started to catch the attention of some influential voices in the tech world who had begun to speak out in her favor. One of her biggest supporters was Maya, a prominent tech entrepreneur who had followed Michelle's work for years. Maya had publicly defended Michelle's contributions to the project and had even gone so far as to call out the company for trying to take credit for her innovation. It felt like a small victory, but to Michelle, it was a beacon of hope. However, even with the public support, Michelle knew that the company wasn't going to back down easily. They had more resources, more influence, and a team of lawyers who were relentless. It was going to take more than just public opinion to win this battle. It was going to take everything she had. One day, as Michelle sat in the waiting room outside the courtroom, Greg came up to her, a grim expression on his face. "Michelle, I need to prepare you for what's coming," he said quietly. "They're not going to stop. And it looks like they have one final move, something that could change the game." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "They filed a counterclaim," Greg said. "They're accusing you of intellectual property theft. They're saying you used some of their proprietary designs in your work without permission. If they're successful, it could destroy your career. You need to be ready for this." Michelle felt the blood drain from her face. This was a game changer. If the company could make this stick, it would ruin her. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, would be taken from her in an instant. She couldn't let it happen. "Is it true?" Michelle asked, her voice tight with fear. Greg shook his head. "No, I've gone through the evidence. There's nothing in their claim that holds water. But they know how to play the game. They'll try to make you look guilty, try to ruin your reputation." Michelle clenched her fists. "Then I'll fight back. I won't let them destroy me. I've come too far." The final battle loomed ahead, and Michelle knew that it was all coming down to this. The company was pulling out all the stops to crush her, to take everything she had fought for. But Michelle wasn't about to give up now. She had been through too much to let them win. The trial was set for the following week. As Michelle stood before the judge, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about her future, her reputation, and her very identity. But she was ready. She had fought for this moment, and now she was going to take it. As the gavel came down and the trial began, Michelle steeled herself. It was time for the final showdown, and she was ready to prove that she was not only the creator of the technology, but the woman who would never back down. Have you ever faced a legal challenge that threatened everything you've worked for? How did you fight back? Share your experience in the comments below. Michelle wasn't done yet. This battle wasn't over, and she was going to make sure she won. The trial had officially begun, and the air in the courtroom felt thick with tension. Michelle could feel every set of eyes on her: judges, lawyers, spectators. It was as if the weight of the entire world was resting on her shoulders. The company's legal team had come prepared, using every strategy in the book to try to discredit her, to paint her as someone who had stolen, manipulated, and twisted the truth to her advantage. They knew they had to break her down, and they were doing everything they could to achieve it. The courtroom was filled with the sound of rapid-fire questions and objections. Michelle sat at the witness stand, her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to let her anxiety show. She had to stay calm. She had to focus. This was her moment to prove not only her innocence but the truth of her actions and the value of her work. The opposing lawyer, a slick man named Timothy Barron, stood up, his face twisted into a confident sneer. He had been relentless, trying to corner Michelle with each question, attempting to make her appear as if she had acted in bad faith. "Miss Taylor," Timothy began, his voice smooth and calculated. "You claim that you were the sole creator of the device in question, that you alone were responsible for its design and innovation. But isn't it true that much of the foundational work was based on proprietary technology owned by the company? Isn't it true that without their guidance and resources, this device would never have been possible?" Michelle's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept her voice steady. "That's simply not true," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I designed that technology from the ground up. The company may have provided resources, but they did not guide the process. They didn't inspire the innovation. I did, and I have the evidence to prove it." Barron chuckled, a mocking sound that made Michelle's stomach churn. "And yet, here we are, with you standing accused of intellectual property theft. How do you explain the discrepancy between your work and the company's patents? How do you explain the similarity between your designs and theirs?" Michelle's breath hitched for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "The designs are not similar, they are entirely different. And if you look at the timeline, you'll see that my work predates any patent claims from the company. The designs I created were my own ideas, born from my experience and knowledge, not stolen from anyone else." The prosecutor's eyes narrowed, but he had no immediate response. He was fishing for anything to undermine her credibility, but Michelle had spent the past several weeks gathering every piece of evidence to support her claims. Her attorney, Greg, had made sure of it. They had emails, drafts, blueprints, and messages that demonstrated her role in the project, her contributions, and most importantly, the ownership she had over the device. There was no way they could twist the facts. Still, Michelle knew that winning the trial wouldn't just be about proving her innocence. It would be about exposing the deeper corruption within the company, the way they had used her for their own gain and then tried to discard her when it was convenient. The tension in the courtroom only heightened as the trial dragged on, and Michelle was faced with question after question, each one more personal than the last. They attempted to attack her character, bringing up her struggles with family, with her job, with her finances. They were trying to break her down emotionally, but Michelle refused to let them see her falter. One afternoon, as Michelle sat through another round of questioning, she glanced over at the company's legal team. She saw the smirk on Barron's face and realized something. This was no longer about the truth. They didn't care about justice. They only cared about winning. They were playing dirty, throwing everything at her in hopes that something would stick. And then, just when Michelle thought things couldn't get worse, she heard it. The voice of her former colleague, Lucas, speaking in the hallway. He had been called in as a witness for the defense. Her heart sank. The man who had helped orchestrate her dismissal from the project, the one who had whispered lies into the ears of the board, was now sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom, ready to testify against her. Lucas had always been a smooth talker, a master of manipulation, and now, it seemed, he had used that charm to win the trust of the company. He stood in the doorway of the courtroom, smiling in her direction as though nothing had happened between them, as if he hadn't betrayed her. Michelle felt a fire ignite inside her. She had known that Lucas was a part of the company's efforts to discredit her, but seeing him stand there, smirking as if he had done nothing wrong, was too much to bear. It was the moment she had feared the most. The one person who knew the full extent of her contributions, the one person who had been there every step of the way, was now part of the effort to destroy her. But she wouldn't let it break her. As the day drew to a close, Michelle stepped outside the courthouse, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. But she wasn't giving up. She couldn't. Too much was at stake. That night, as Michelle sat in her apartment, staring at the piles of evidence she had compiled, her phone rang. It was Sarah. "Michelle, I've been following the trial," Sarah said, her voice full of concern. "How are you holding up?" Michelle took a deep breath. "I'm fine, but I need to get ahead of this. Lucas is testifying against me tomorrow, and I can't let him lie on the stand. I need to expose him. I need to make sure the jury sees him for who he really is." Sarah paused before speaking again. "I know you're strong, but remember, you don't have to do this alone. You've got people who believe in you, people who are willing to stand by you, even if Lucas turns on you." Michelle looked out the window, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. But Sarah was right. She wasn't alone. She had fought this far, and she would fight until the very end. With renewed determination, Michelle stood up, ready to face the next day in court. It was her final chance to prove the truth and to show the world the kind of person Lucas truly was. Michelle wasn't backing down. She had one more fight left in her. And this time, she was going to win. The next morning, the courtroom was buzzing with energy as Michelle stepped back into the arena, knowing that today was crucial. Today, she would face the person who had once been her closest ally, Lucas. The thought of him betraying her still stung, but it wasn't just about the personal hurt anymore. It was about exposing the truth. She was done being the victim. Now, it was time to make her voice heard. As the trial began, the air was thick with anticipation. Lucas was called to the stand. He walked in with his usual confidence, his perfectly tailored suit and calm demeanor only adding to the facade of credibility he projected. Michelle clenched her jaw, trying to remain composed as he took his seat. Barron, the company's lawyer, stood up and addressed Lucas, his tone friendly and supportive. "Mr. Miller, can you tell the court about your experience working with Ms. Taylor on the project?" Lucas gave a small smile. "Of course. I worked closely with Michelle for months. She was very driven, but also very emotional. She often got carried away with her ideas, and I had to step in a few times to help guide the project in the right direction." Michelle's fists tightened at her sides. The lies were coming faster than she could process them. She knew Lucas had always been manipulative, but hearing him twist the facts in such a calculated way made her blood boil. He was trying to paint her as unstable, as someone who couldn't be trusted to lead the project. Barron pressed on. "And when Ms. Taylor was dismissed from the project, how did you feel about the decision?" Lucas hesitated for a moment before responding, his voice smooth. "It was a tough decision. Michelle wasn't performing as expected, and the company felt it was in the best interest to move forward with someone who had a more professional approach." The courtroom murmured, and Michelle's heart sank. It was all lies, all manipulations. But she knew the truth would eventually come out. Greg, her lawyer, stood up, his voice cutting through the tension. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating and providing personal opinions rather than facts." The judge nodded, and Barron quickly redirected the line of questioning. "Mr. Miller, let's focus on the technical aspects of the project. Can you explain how the initial designs were developed and what role you played in that process?" Lucas nodded, clearly relieved to return to safer ground. "Sure. I was involved in the early stages of development, reviewing the designs and providing feedback. Michelle often relied on me to refine the technical aspects and ensure the project stayed on track." Michelle's mind raced. This was where it would all come crashing down. She had to speak up now. Before Barron could continue, Michelle raised her hand and stood up, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge, somewhat surprised, nodded. "Ms. Taylor, this is highly unusual, but if you wish to make a statement, you may proceed." With a deep breath, Michelle walked to the front of the courtroom. She could feel every eye on her, but she didn't let it intimidate her. She had to take control of the narrative. "Lucas," she began, her voice steady but firm, "you know as well as I do that the project was my vision from the start. You didn't guide the project, you controlled it. You didn't refine the designs, you rewrote them. And you didn't help me, you used me. You took credit for everything I did. And when the company realized how valuable my work was, they threw me aside. There was a collective gasp from the courtroom. Michelle could see the shock on Lucas's face as he tried to maintain his composure, but the cracks were beginning to show. Your Honor, Michelle continued, I have evidence to prove that my designs were my own. I can show the court the emails, the documents, the sketches that I submitted before Lucas ever got involved. He wasn't there at the beginning. I was. The judge looked at Michelle, clearly taken aback by her boldness, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. Proceed, Miss Taylor, he said. With a nod, Michelle turned to Greg, who immediately handed over the files to the judge. The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. Lucas's face paled as the judge flipped through the pages of emails, designs, and timestamps. It was clear now. Michelle had been the driving force behind the project from the very beginning, and Lucas had only inserted himself once the project gained attention. The pieces were falling into place. Greg stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. Ms. Taylor was not only the creator of this project, but the only one truly responsible for its success. The defendant's attempts to claim credit for her work are nothing more than a calculated effort to discredit her. Lucas's eyes flicked nervously toward Barron, but there was no escaping the truth now. The tide had turned. In that moment, Michelle realized that this was more than just a trial. It was a battle for her identity, her future, and the recognition she deserved. She had worked too hard, fought too long, and sacrificed too much to let someone like Lucas take it all away. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the evidence, the gravity of the situation sinking in. And then, finally, he spoke. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Ms. Taylor was the sole inventor and creator of the technology in question. The counterclaim filed by the defendant is dismissed. Ms. Taylor, you are entitled to the full recognition of your work. A wave of relief washed over Michelle. She had done it. She had won. As she stepped down from the stand, she caught Greg's eye, and he gave her a small, approving nod. Michelle smiled back, grateful for everything he had done. But the battle wasn't completely over. There were still questions of compensation, contracts, and the company's future involvement with her work. But for now, she had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Walking out of the courtroom, Michelle felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had the truth on her side. And with that truth, she could finally begin to rebuild her life, to forge a future that was hers and hers alone. Have you ever had to fight for something that was taken from you? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn from it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Michelle wasn't finished. This was only the beginning. Now, with her name cleared, she would take back her life, her legacy, and her future. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Michelle, the sound echoing in her ears as she stepped into the hallway. The weight of everything that had just happened still felt surreal, like a dream she couldn't quite wake up from. She had won. Against all odds, against the system that had tried to crush her spirit. It wasn't just the victory in the courtroom that mattered. It was the validation of her worth, her skills, and her truth. Greg, her attorney, walked beside her, a satisfied smile on his face. You did it, he said, his voice full of pride. You were incredible in there. Michelle gave him a tired smile, though her eyes were still filled with disbelief. I just did what I had to do. I couldn't let them destroy everything I've worked for. Greg nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. And now they can't. You've set the record straight. The world knows who you are now. It wasn't just the case that was over. Michelle realized she had just emerged from a dark tunnel, a place where she had been tested and broken down, but ultimately rebuilt. She had fought for something more than just compensation or recognition. She had fought for herself, for the ability to stand tall and unapologetic in the face of adversity. But the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. The media had picked up on the trial, and Michelle's story had become one of the most talked about legal battles of the year. Some hailed her as a hero, others saw her as a cautionary tale, but for the first time in months, she could finally breathe without feeling the constant pressure of the past looming over her. A few days later, as Michelle sat in her apartment, scrolling through social media, she saw the flood of messages pouring in. Messages of congratulations, support, and even some from former colleagues who had long since distanced themselves from her. There were also the inevitable critics, those who would never see her actions as anything but an act of revenge. But it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was free, and she had proven that the truth always has a way of finding the light. As Michelle scrolled through the comments, one message stood out. It was from a woman named Eliza, a former employee of the company who had witnessed much of what had unfolded from the sidelines. The message was simple but powerful. "I knew you were right all along. I'm so proud of you for not giving up. You've inspired me to speak up about my own experiences." A sense of warmth filled Michelle's chest. She hadn't expected this, but it made her realize something important. She wasn't alone in her struggle. There were others out there who had faced the same betrayals, the same injustices. By standing up for herself, she had given them the courage to do the same. And that was worth more than any victory in a courtroom. Later that week, Michelle received a call that would change everything. It was from an executive at a startup company focused on sustainable energy solutions. The company had been following the trial closely, and they were impressed not only by Michelle's brilliance, but by her resilience. They wanted to offer her a position as head of their new innovation division. They saw potential in her, potential she had once thought had been buried beneath the weight of the past. Michelle was taken aback. She had spent so long fighting for the chance to prove herself, she hadn't even considered what came after. The thought of starting fresh, in an environment that valued her expertise and vision, was both exciting and terrifying. But deep down, she knew this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to thrive. "I'll do it," Michelle said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "I'm ready for this next chapter." The next few months passed in a blur. Michelle moved into a new office, one that was bright and full of possibility. Her team was small but passionate, and together, they worked tirelessly to develop new, groundbreaking technologies that could change the world. There were long hours and countless challenges, but Michelle felt more alive than she had in years. This was her time to shine, and nothing was going to hold her back. But Michelle wasn't just building a career anymore. She was rebuilding herself. The woman who had once been dismissed and discarded was now leading a team of brilliant minds, her ideas shaping the future. She had taken everything she had learned from her struggles, the pain, the heartache, the lies, and used it to fuel her success. One afternoon, as Michelle stood in front of a room full of investors, pitching her latest project, she caught sight of someone in the back of the room. It was Sarah, her friend who had supported her every step of the way. Sarah had been by her side through the darkest moments, and now she was there to witness Michelle's triumph. After the meeting, Sarah approached Michelle, her eyes shining with pride. "You've come so far. I knew you had it in you." Michelle smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You've always believed in me." As they hugged, Michelle realized that everything she had gone through, the trial, the betrayals, the sleepless nights, had been worth it. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future held. The world had tried to break her, but Michelle had never given up. She had fought for her dreams, for her truth, and for the future she believed in. And now, as she looked around at the life she had built, she knew that no one could take it away from her. She had proved that no matter the obstacles, the truth always finds a way to rise to the surface. And with that truth, she had created a new beginning. Months had passed since Michelle's victory, but every step she took forward was still grounded in the journey that had brought her here. The company she now worked for was thriving, and with every breakthrough, she felt a new sense of purpose. She had moved past the shadows of her past, but the legacy of her fight for truth was something she carried with her every day. It was a reminder of how far she had come, and a responsibility to make sure that the future she built would be one worth fighting for. One evening, Michelle sat alone in her office, the soft hum of the city just outside the window. She glanced at the framed photograph of her and her mother that sat on her desk, a reminder of the woman who had always believed in her, even when Michelle herself had doubted. Her mother had been the first person to teach her that resilience wasn't just about survival. It was about making sure the world knew your worth, no matter the odds. As Michelle reviewed some new designs for a sustainable energy project, Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Greg, her former attorney, who had become a close friend since the trial. "Hey, I know you're busy, but I need to talk. Something came up, and I think you should know about it. Call me when you can." Her curiosity piqued. Michelle put down the designs and dialed his number. "Greg? What's going on?" His voice was serious, more serious than she'd ever heard it before. "Michelle, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I just got wind of something. Lucas has filed a new lawsuit against you. It's not just about the company anymore. It's personal." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, personal?" "He's accusing you of stealing his intellectual property," Greg said, his tone tight with frustration. "He's not just challenging your work anymore. He's coming after everything you've built. The company, the investors, all of it. He's making it sound like you're the one who stole his ideas." Michelle felt a cold wave of shock wash over her. "But that's ridiculous. Everything I've done is mine. It's all documented. This is just another attempt to drag me back down." "I know," Greg said, his voice softening, "but he's got some powerful people backing him now, and it looks like he's going all in on this." The reality of the situation hit Michelle like a ton of bricks. The past few months had been a time of healing and rebuilding, but it was clear now that her fight with Lucas was far from over. He wasn't content to let her move on. He wanted to destroy everything she had fought so hard for. "I won't let him win," Michelle said, her voice unwavering. "I've come too far to let him take everything from me again. If he thinks he can break me, he's sorely mistaken." Greg sighed, sounding more concerned now. "I believe you, Michelle, but this is going to be a much bigger fight than the last one. You need to be ready for the long haul." "Then I'll be ready," Michelle replied, determination flooding her veins. "I'll fight him again, and this time, I'm not just fighting for me. I'm fighting for everyone who's ever been pushed aside. I'm fighting for everyone who's been silenced." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and sleepless nights. Michelle knew that Lucas would stop at nothing to destroy her. He had power, money, and influence on his side. But she had something far more important, truth. And with it, she would fight with everything she had. She worked closely with her team to gather every piece of evidence, every document, every piece of communication that would prove her innocence and expose Lucas for the fraud he was. The company's reputation was on the line again, but Michelle was no longer the scared, beaten-down woman she had been in the past. She was a force to be reckoned with. One afternoon, as she met with her legal team, Michelle stared down at the pile of documents spread across the conference table. The weight of it all was overwhelming, but there was no turning back. She could already hear Lucas's voice in her head, smooth, calculating, trying to tear everything she had built apart. But Michelle wouldn't allow it. She wouldn't let his lies take her down again. "I know what I'm up against," she said, her voice steady, "but I won't back down. We have the truth, and that's all I need. Let's show the world who the real fraud is." Her legal team exchanged a look, their confidence in her unwavering. Greg, seated beside her, gave her an encouraging nod. "We're with you, Michelle. We'll make sure this time you come out on top. No one is going to take what's yours." Michelle nodded, her resolve strengthening. She was done being the victim. This was her story, and she was going to finish it on her own terms. Over the next few weeks, Michelle's life became a blur of courtrooms, press conferences, and constant preparation. The legal battle had escalated beyond what she had expected, but she was determined not to let Lucas win. This time, there would be no compromise. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting with her legal team, Michelle returned to her apartment, exhausted but determined. She sat on the couch, staring out at the city lights, reflecting on everything she had endured. It was hard to believe that just a year ago, she had been fighting for her job, her dignity, and her future. And now, she was fighting not only for herself, but for something even greater. The truth, the legacy of her work, and the opportunity to leave a mark on the world. In that moment, Michelle made a promise to herself. No matter what happened in the coming days, no matter how difficult the fight ahead would be, she would never give up. She had already come too far, and she knew, deep down, that the truth would always win in the end. Michelle wasn't done yet. The battle was still raging, But she was ready. She had built her foundation on truth, and that foundation would never crumble. The days stretched on, each one a battle in its own right. Michelle had poured every ounce of energy she had into preparing for the fight with Lucas. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about defending her work anymore. It was about ensuring her legacy, her company's survival, and proving to the world that truth always prevails. Her phone rang again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Greg. His voice on the other end was calm, but Michelle could sense the tension in his words. "Michelle, we've just received a new development. Lucas has found a way to bring in new witnesses. He's got a few people from within your old company who are willing to testify against you." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. Who? Who is he pulling in now? "It's people you never would have expected," Greg continued. "But they're credible witnesses. We have to be ready." "He's desperate, Michelle. This isn't just about what's true anymore. It's about making it look like you're the one who's guilty." Michelle's mind raced. She had spent weeks compiling evidence of her innocence, proving that she had never stolen anything from Lucas or anyone else. But now, these new witnesses threatened to turn the tide. The fear that had been creeping in for weeks settled into her chest, but she refused to let it take root. "No one can make it look like I'm guilty, Greg. I'm telling the truth, and that's all I need." She could hear him take a deep breath on the other end of the line. "You're right, but we need to prepare for the worst. This is going to be a long, hard fight. We need to be ready for anything." The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, but Michelle held on to her resolve. She had been through the fire before, and she wasn't about to be burned again. She knew that if she could just hold on to the truth, there was no way Lucas could win. The next few days were a blur. Michelle spent long hours in strategy sessions with Greg and her legal team, preparing for the oncoming storm. They studied Lucas's witnesses, reviewed their testimony, and cross-checked every piece of evidence they could find. But each new revelation from Lucas's side seemed to strengthen his case. It felt like the walls were closing in on Michelle, but she refused to falter. The moment of truth was approaching, and she had to be ready. The trial began with a sense of finality. The courtroom was packed, the tension in the air palpable. Michelle sat at the defense table, her eyes focused and her posture straight. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she steeled herself for what was coming. This was it, the final showdown. There was no room for fear, no room for hesitation. She had to stand tall, no matter what. Lucas entered the courtroom with his usual confidence, his sharp suit and cold demeanor making it clear he was prepared to do whatever it took to win. As he walked past Michelle's table, he didn't even spare her a glance. But Michelle saw the smirk on his face. He was ready to destroy her. The first few hours of the trial were filled with testimonies, each one more damning than the last. The witnesses Lucas had brought in spoke with conviction, painting a picture of Michelle as a thief who had stolen ideas and used underhanded tactics to get ahead. Each word they spoke felt like a blow to Michelle's heart, but she kept her focus. She knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. It was her turn to testify. As she walked to the witness stand, she felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the edge of the stand. But she looked up, meeting the eyes of the jury, and found a small measure of comfort in their gazes. She wasn't alone. Greg was by her side, guiding her through the questions with his steady voice. The questions were tough, designed to make her doubt herself, but Michelle answered each one with calm determination. She described her journey, how she had come to build her career, how she had worked tirelessly to make a difference, and how Lucas had always undermined her at every turn. She told the jury about the betrayal, the lies, and the pain that had come with it. But more than anything, she made them understand her passion for what she had created. When she was done, she sat back down, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had told the truth, and that was all she could do. But Lucas wasn't done yet. He rose to make his final argument, his voice smooth and calculated. He painted Michelle as a woman consumed by ambition, a woman willing to do anything to succeed, even if it meant stealing from those closest to her. He called her a liar and a thief, a woman who couldn't be trusted. Michelle's stomach churned as he spoke. He was trying to break her, trying to make her doubt everything she had worked for. But she couldn't let him. Not this time. She had fought too hard for too long. As the final words were spoken, the jury was sent to deliberate. Michelle sat in silence, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Would they believe her? Would they see the truth? It felt like hours, but finally, the jury returned. The tension in the room was unbearable as the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty or not guilty? The judge asked. The foreman's voice rang out, loud and clear. Not guilty. Michelle's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to spin, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she had heard it correctly. But then, the courtroom erupted into applause. She had won. Tears filled her eyes as she stood, her hands shaking with emotion. She had done it. She had defeated Lucas, defeated the lies, and most importantly, she had proven her worth to the world. The long fight had come to an end, and she had emerged victorious. As Michelle walked out of the courtroom, the weight of everything she had fought for finally began to lift. She had faced her demons, confronted her past, and come out stronger than ever. The world was hers to conquer now, but she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. What's the hardest battle you've ever fought, and how did it change you? Share your story in the comments below. Michelle had learned the most important lesson of all, that no matter how dark the fight, the light of truth would always lead the way, and she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks following the trial were a blur of celebrations, media attention, and a newfound sense of peace for Michelle. She had won the fight. No, she had triumphed. The courtroom victory over Lucas was monumental, but it was what came after that made her realize just how much her life had truly changed. She had fought against lies, against betrayal, and against a system that had once tried to crush her. Now, she was standing on the other side of it, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. Michelle's company had flourished in the aftermath of the trial. Investors, seeing the strength and resilience she had shown, came rushing in with new partnerships, eager to back her ideas. Her team had rallied around her, their loyalty stronger than ever, and the work they were doing, sustainable energy, climate change solutions, had the potential to change the world. Michelle's vision had always been one of progress, but now it felt more real than ever before. One evening, as she sat in her office overlooking the city, Michelle allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had come so far. The woman who had been fired, who had fought tooth and nail for her place in the world, was now the CEO of a company that was changing the landscape of innovation. She had always believed that success was not just about reaching the top, but about how you got there, and the lessons learned along the way. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Greg. "We need to talk. It's about your next steps." Michelle frowned. She had been focused on the company's growth and her personal healing, but she knew that Greg had been by her side through everything. If he wanted to talk, it was important. She dialed his number immediately. "Hey, Greg. What's going on?" "Hey, Michelle," Greg said, his voice laced with concern. "I know things are going well with the company, but there's something else we need to discuss. A lot of eyes are on you now, more than before. It's not just about business anymore. It's about who you're becoming, what you stand for." Michelle listened closely, sensing the gravity in his voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that with the kind of platform you've got now, there's a bigger responsibility on your shoulders," Greg continued. "You've got the potential to shape industries, to influence policies, and to stand up for people who've been silenced. This isn't just about creating a successful business. You have the chance to make a real impact, to change lives, to leave a legacy that goes beyond the numbers." Michelle's heart raced. She had always known that her work was bigger than herself, but hearing it from Greg made it feel even more real. The weight of what he was saying settled in her chest, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity to do something that could change the world. "I know what you're saying," Michelle replied slowly, her voice filled with resolve. "I've always wanted my work to make a difference. But what do you mean by legacy? What's the next step for me?" Greg was silent for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. Finally, he spoke again. "I think it's time for you to take your story beyond the business world, to use your voice, your platform, to speak up for what you believe in. You've faced so much adversity, but you've come through stronger. And people need to hear that. The world needs to hear it. Michelle's mind spun as she absorbed his words. She had always kept her personal story separate from her professional life. It had been too painful, too complicated. But now, Greg was suggesting something different. Something that terrified her but also felt deeply right. What if she could inspire others? What if her journey could be a beacon for those still fighting? Are you saying I should write a book? Michelle asked, half joking, half hopeful. Greg chuckled softly. I'm not just talking about writing a book, though that's a start. I'm talking about becoming a voice for change, a leader in more ways than one. You've already done something incredible with your company. Now, it's time to inspire others with your story. It's time to show them what's possible when you fight for what's right. Michelle sat back in her chair, letting the weight of his words settle into her bones. For so long, her focus had been on proving herself, on surviving, on winning. But now, it was about more than that. It was about paying it forward. It was about showing others that they, too, could overcome the odds. I think you're right, Michelle said finally, a sense of purpose flooding through her. It's time to do more. Time to speak up for the people who have no voice, the ones who are still out there fighting their own battles. Greg smiled on the other end of the line. That's the Michelle I know. The world needs more of that. The conversation ended, but the seeds had been planted. Michelle knew what her next steps were. She would continue building her company, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in sustainable energy. But beyond that, she would use her platform to advocate for change, fighting for justice, equality, and for those who didn't have the power to stand up for themselves. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Michelle didn't need to look back anymore. She had faced her demons, and now, she was ready to help others face theirs. The world was waiting for her, and she was ready to change it. As Michelle sat at her desk, looking out over the city that had watched her rise, she knew this was just the beginning. The world had been her battleground, but now, it would be her canvas. And she was ready to paint a new future, one where the possibilities were limitless. It had been 6 months since the trial, 6 months since Michelle had stood in that courtroom, fighting for her truth, her company, and her future. Now, the dust had settled, and the weight of her journey had begun to crystallize into something tangible. She had built an empire, yes, but more importantly, she had built a platform, a voice, one that would be heard across industries and, most importantly, across communities that had long been ignored. Her work in sustainable energy was booming. New projects, new partnerships, and an ever-growing team of passionate individuals had taken her company to heights she'd once only dreamed of. But as much as she loved the work, Michelle knew that her real calling was now in the impact she could make beyond the boardroom. She had lived through betrayal, corporate wars, and personal loss, but through it all, she had never lost sight of her core mission: to create a world that was fairer, more just, and more compassionate. Michelle had spent the past few months meeting with nonprofit organizations, speaking to marginalized communities, and collaborating with government leaders on policies that could help reduce inequality in the workplace and in education. Her voice had become an instrument for change, one that resonated with those who needed it most. But today, as she entered a large conference room at the headquarters of her company, something felt different. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. There were more people than usual in the room: investors, partners, and a few familiar faces from her past. The energy was palpable, and Michelle felt the familiar nervous flutter in her chest. She was about to announce something big. Greg stood by her side as she glanced over her notes. His face was a mask of calm, but Michelle knew him well enough to see the glimmer of excitement in his eyes. He'd been by her side through it all: the rise, the fall, and the rise again. And now, together, they were about to launch something that would forever change their company's legacy. "Michelle," Greg whispered, "they're ready for you." She nodded, taking a deep breath. She had prepared for this moment, but she knew there was no way to truly prepare for the weight it carried. Today was the culmination of everything she had fought for, not just for herself, but for the people she had come to represent. Taking her place at the front of the room, Michelle looked out over the sea of faces before her. These were the people who believed in her vision, the ones who had stood by her when things seemed impossible. They had been there when she had nothing, and now they were here to see her take the next step. Thank you all for being here today, Michelle began, her voice steady and clear. As many of you know, this company was founded on a simple principle, that we have the power to change the world. That power is not just in what we create, but in who we empower along the way. She paused, letting her words sink in. Her team had always been the heart of the company, and now, she was speaking to them as one collective force. They had worked tirelessly to make her vision a reality. But today, she was asking them to take another step forward. In the past few months, she continued, I've had the privilege of working with communities that are often overlooked, and I've seen firsthand how much we can accomplish when we come together for a common cause. Our work is not just about the bottom line. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, to thrive, and to be heard. And so, today, I am proud to announce that we are launching our first philanthropic initiative. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on Michelle. She could feel the weight of their expectations, but it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like purpose. This initiative, she said, will focus on empowering underrepresented communities by providing them with access to education, mentorship, and sustainable job opportunities. We are partnering with several organizations and institutions that share our vision of creating a more equitable world. Together, we will open doors that were once closed, and we will make sure that no one is left behind. A wave of applause rippled through the room, and Michelle couldn't help but smile. This was what it had all been leading up to. This was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Not just a successful business, but a movement that would shape industries and transform lives. Greg stepped forward, a proud smile on his face. Michelle, you've done it. This is going to change so many lives. Michelle nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. We've only just begun, Greg. This is just the first step. We can do more. We will do more. As the meeting concluded and her team began discussing the logistics of the new initiative, Michelle stepped out into the hallway, needing a moment to herself. She found a quiet corner, leaning against the wall, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. For the first time in a long while, Michelle felt at peace. She had come full circle. The woman who had once been fired for helping Elon Musk had now become the woman who was helping others, fighting not just for success, but for justice, for equality, and for the chance to make the world a better place. She had faced betrayal, adversity, and uncertainty. She had lost everything, only to rebuild it all with determination and unwavering belief in herself. And now, she was standing at the threshold of something even greater. Michelle closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The world was waiting for her, and she was ready. What's the one thing you've always wanted to do to make a difference in the world? How can you take the first step toward that goal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Michelle's story had come to a close, but the journey for many others was just beginning. And in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of a much bigger adventure. The legacy she would leave wasn't just about what she had built. It was about the lives she had touched along the way. And she was determined to make sure that her story would inspire generations to come.